So I'm sure you have a lot of food for thought. I surely do. So I will also try to kind of connect to maybe some of the themes that we have been exploring these days in my talk. So yes, and today basically I have a kind of double task. So my overarching question is a very big one, ambitious one. Okay, how to bring about socio-ecological transformation that would be aligned with degrowth. So, and I will break the presentation into 3 parts. So one is unpacking briefly what degrowth is about. So then the second part will be on the debate on degrowth in relation to strategy so far. And the third part, which will be kind of the longest chunk, will be on how to think about strategies analytically, which I hope will be helpful for you to take into the different spaces where you are active. So maybe just to start with a little kind of wake-up exercise. I'm copying from Boston here, who did it the first day. So those of you who have a good idea of degrowth, could you stand up? Okay, nice. So quite a few people, but also very nice that for some of you it is something relatively new. So basically, those of you who know very well maybe what degrowth is about, I hope also my introduction will help you to connect maybe to how you have been seeing degrowth discussions. And then to those of you who are new to it, I also hope that it will be kind of helpful and clear, even if it will be a very short introduction to degrowth. So, okay. Yeah, I will click here. That's fine. Maybe I'm just, I think I was using it the wrong way. So, no, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so degrowth can be said to be a vision for socio-ecological transformation. So, and there are many definitions, but one can say that it is kind of an umbrella term that critiques the centrality of economic growth in our economies and societies, and envisions alternatives that are both ecologically sustainable and socially just, and foster human and also non-human flourishing. So the idea, also that's another kind of definition of degrowth, is that the material and energy throughput, or the overall use of energy and resources, and the overall amount also of waste, should decrease in absolute terms in our societies, whilst ensuring well-being for all. And all I have here in capital letters, because really it is the idea that it is for all on the planet. So not only people, let's say, in Europe or parts of Europe, not only the privileged classes, but everyone, so in the north and in the south, from different walks of life, from different kind of social circumstances. So then also, of course, there are many misinterpretations of what degrowth is about. So I think that it's also important to specify what kinds of growth we refer to when we speak about degrowth. And together with my colleague and friend Alexander Paulson, we kind of identified 3 main things. So one is the growth of use of energy and material, so this like biophysical or material throughput that I mentioned already. So the second is capital accumulation and productivism. So the idea is that kind of growing production for its own sake is problematic, so we don't need it. So what we need is a satisfaction of needs for all. And then the third thing is maybe the most intuitive, is the growth of GDP, because of course the national economies in most countries are very much aligned with this particular measure, a quantitative measure, which I will explain in which ways it is problematic. So, And basically, yeah, visualizations are often nice and helpful. So degrowth is not about this kind of big elephant that the economy is today. So, but it is about building and struggling for something different. So a snail is a common symbol for degrowth, but there are also others. So then there are several critiques of growth or growth centrism from degrowth. So one is economic, is that, okay, perpetual growth is not really possible, and GDP is an inadequate measure of well-being. So economists usually say that the economy should be growing at 3% annually, globally, for things to be going well. So, which degrowthers, we think it is quite absurd as a goal. So, and also the kind of this measure GDP that I already mentioned to you. So, it is a quantitative measure. It was introduced by Simon Kuznets, during the times of the Depression in the US, to kind of see how the economy in the US was doing during that time. And actually, even if he was definitely not a degrowther, very far from that, but he was not seeing it as a measure of welfare or well-being. But this measure went even beyond what he expected for it, and became something that our life is very much organized around, and the economies are organized around. So, but of course, it is very problematic in various ways. So, for example, it doesn't include the ecological destruction that comes, or exploitation that comes with a lot of economic activity. Or it also does not include a lot of the things which are meaningful whilst are not monetized. So, care, friendships, and things like this. So, then a strong critique of growth is also that the ecological, so growth leads to ecological degradation. So that's the part of the graph from this kind of classic almost paper. So basically, in the period that we can call as great acceleration, so from the 1950s onwards, we see the rise of GDP, which comes together with the rise of energy use, and also with different kind of ecological consequences, such as the growth of greenhouse gas emissions, but also others, other environmental pressures. And the kind of idea, the mainstream idea is green growth, so that it is possible to decouple the growth of GDP from environmental pressures. So, but this is not something that we have really seen happening, and there is no reason to think that we can see it happening on a global scale. And basically, the very simple explanation is that a lot of things that are even positioned as green and are very much emphasized in the green growth discussions, like technologies, digital infrastructures, mass kind of scale renewable energies, they do need a lot of energy, materials, and resources. No? So we need like huge data centers to support digitalization. We need a lot of extractivism to support this kind of mass scale renewable energy. So, and that basically is not only unsustainable, but also comes with a lot of injustices or even violence. So that is the third critique of growth by the growthers, is that basically growth is based on injustices between the global north and the global south, between different regions within, let's say, various continents. So we were discussing here, no, that it's quite different things, the way things are in Northern Europe and the way things are in, say, Eastern and Southern Europe, and how some spaces in, say, Eastern Europe or the Balkans are seen as this possible kind of sacrifice zones, or the zones for future extraction for the green transition. So, and then also, yeah, maybe something to show globally. I think it's a very helpful visualization, the environmental justice map. It maps like the conflicts, environmental conflicts around the world, and they are about all sorts of economic activities. So they are about extraction and fossil fuels, but there also many of them are about renewable energy and things that are seen as very desirable in the green growth agenda. So then also the growth critique is that, okay, it's a particular way of living that comes together and is very much promoted together with the pursuit of economic growth, such as workerism, consumerism, acceleration, and it's actually a question if these are the things that bring the good life. So we see a lot of burnouts in society, we see a lot of people really not connected to the work that they are doing, and few of us have the luxury to have like a secure work in the first place and to be able to really like and enjoy it. So mostly it is not like this. So, and basically the simple argument is that it's not necessary. Growth is not necessary for good life, and it is something different that we should be after. So then, what is it, what the growth alternatives are about? So we can say that the growth is a theory of radical abundance. We're not the only ones kind of mobilizing this term, so other people have been doing it also who connect to maybe related discussions. So, but it is a theory of radical abundance within planetary and societal boundaries. So the argument is that there is actually enough for all on the planet to live well, but this enough is not distributed equally, and it is not organized well. So instead, now we have the overproduction, overconsumption, and so on. So, and then the kinds of values that we emphasize in the growth are like mutual aid, care, solidarity, conviviality, direct democracy, and the list can go on. And also these are the values that we have heard here in this couple of days at the summer school. So also, of course, it's not, the growers are not the only ones who emphasize something similar. So many speaking from, say, eco-socialist, eco-feminist positions would identify similar kind of features as important for reorganizing our societies. So then when it comes to economies and reorganizing economies, the growers speak quite a lot of that, like what is to do with the economy, which is so problematic today. So, and we usually emphasize the open relocalization of economies, focused on regenerative activities, and we emphasize kind of life-making versus profit-making and satisfying of human needs. That also comes with different forms of organizing and different forms of ownership. So cooperative, community forms of ownership and organizing, commoning, these are some of the examples that are flagged in the growth as kind of capable to move us towards this more desirable economy. So, and not for profit and not for growth is a good way to kind of to describe them. There are many examples of alternatives that we say connect, let's say, to this degrowth values or degrowth vision. So on the photo here is the Alnarp agroecology farm, close to where I live in Malmö. So it's between Malmö and Lund, but there are many other initiatives around the world. So wherever you are, you can find similar things. So yesterday, Rita was mentioning quite a few initiatives that work on food justice and food sovereignty. So, Zoe Christina was mentioning the renewable, the kind of smaller scale renewable energy that is more collectively organized. So these are also the kinds of examples that we would bring up when discussing alternatives that are already there. And that is very good. So there are many alternatives out there. So this is like a powerful message that also the growth discussions embrace. And the overall idea is that the transformation is to be bottom up. So, but also recognizing that it's quite difficult to really change things without tackling the various levels of kind of governance. So in that sense, it is at different levels that it is to be pushed: local, municipal, regional, supranational, and so on. So, and maybe one more thing to mention when kind of wrapping up this discussion of the introduction to degrowth is that the idea is that degrowth is not some kind of vision that should become something embraced by everyone. That's definitely not the case. So we very much see degrowth as part of a pluriverse of alternatives of socio-ecological transformation, and then various discussions have been happening with others. So ecofeminists, eco-socialists, concepts from other parts of the world, like ecological Swaraj in India, Buen Vivir in Latin America, Ubuntu in Africa, and there are many other kind of concepts that help to describe more locally embedded worldviews that can be allied and that are allied with degrowth thinking, but are more connected to the context where they come from. So, okay, degrowth and strategy so far. So basically, strategy has been an emergent discussion. And degrowth, it's, I think, started in Malmo, 2018, so the conference that I was involved in organizing, that many young people, scholars, activists came and said that, okay, it's very nice, empowering discussions that we're having here. We have good ideas of the various alternatives. We also have good ideas of what can bring them about, the various measures, including policies, because the growers also don't shy away from kind of thinking about policy proposals and things like this. So, but how do we actually make this happen? So how do we move beyond this understanding that in principle we can have a different system? So, and that's where the question of strategy becomes key. And Hubert Buchanan has this nice kind of identification of the four conditions of a paradigm shift. I think he draws on the comparative political economy to identify those, and he basically has been applying them to degrowth. And basically the conditions are a deep crisis. We have heard a lot about crisis at the summer school, and we can definitely say that, okay, we do have it. And maybe one, I would frame it that we have a capitalist polycrisis. So many facets of a crisis, but it is very much rooted in the capitalist modes of production and in the capitalist system. So then alternative political project is also needed for this paradigm shift. So, and degrowth is one such project, but as I have mentioned, there are also others. So these two conditions are very much satisfied. But then the other two is where we have a problem. So basically, we need a comprehensive coalition of social forces promoting this project. And in relation to degrowth, we can see the kind of rise in these discussions. And my colleague and friend Max Koch, who is also based at Lund and in Malmo, says that, okay, from these lunatics, the way we were seen before, we are now like a respected minority. So probably that's where we have moved over some decades of degrowth discussions. But we really don't have this comprehensive coalition of social forces that stands together, let's say, to promote degrowth-compatible alternatives. And we also don't have this broad-based consent among the, let's say, people more generally. So, and basically, that brings us to the question of how, the question of strategy. And I think these are the two key conditions to think about when trying to figure out this kind of strategic pathways for transforming our societies. So strategy is an emerging discussion in degrowth. Before the kind of more recent efforts to tackle it, there were always, like, strategy would always be mentioned when degrowth is discussed, but not really scrutinized. And some people would see degrowth itself as a strategy, which is not how I would see it. So, and the kind of key contribution to the discussion so far has been the book that we have co-edited together with, so it's mostly people from the Vienna, Degrowth Vienna, and I have also joined them in this effort. And the book, so it's called Degrowth and Strategy, How to Bring About Socio-Ecological Transformation. It has been published in open access by an independent open access publisher, Mayfly, so you can easily find it if you haven't come across it yet. So, but so far, this is kind of the biggest, let's say, contribution that we have to the discussions of strategy, but we also see it very much as a stepping stone. There is much more to be thought through and much more to be said. And the book, we wanted it not to be our kind of expert's opinion on what strategy should be in relation to degrowth, but it really collects a lot of different voices that are aligned with degrowth discussions. So there are more than 40 people who have contributed to different parts of the book. So the idea is to think through strategy together collectively, and the book does it kind of, there is a part that looks at strategy more theoretically, but also part that looks more at strategies in practice and in different spheres of life. Work, care, trade and decolonization, and so on. So, and other people have been engaging with this discussion, but today will be very much basing my kind of third part of the talk on my own contribution to this book. So before I do this, however, just like what is strategy? So how do we understand it in the book? So we understand it as a theoretical understanding, sorry for the tautology, by actors about how a long-term goal, such as degrowth or socio-ecological transformation, can be achieved. So, and that can translate into deliberate and intentional actions to achieve this goal. So this is different to understanding strategy as a practice, which has been done in some kind of work, and that connects to some understandings of prefigurative politics, for example, that Rita talked about yesterday. So our thinking is that we need to kind of have some understanding of what strategy is and to be able to apply it intentionally in the context where we are. So also, now that I have introduced to you what degrowth is about, so it is a very, so we have particular, let's say, an agreement on some broad features of it within the degrowth network or community or movement, whatever you want to call it, but also it consists of multiple voices. So in a way, it is, when working on the book, we didn't want it to be like dogmatic, and we want to cherish this multiplicity of voices in degrowth discussions. So, and this is how this really informs how we are trying to conceptualize strategy. So we acknowledge that this is a very contested concept in general, so it has been much more used in the spaces like the military or mainstream management practices. So both of which have contributed to the world and keep contributing to the world that we want to really dismantle and that we want to transform. So, but also, we're not alone in thinking about strategy from kind of the bottom-up perspectives. So it has been engaged with by various social movements, and there are multiple books here that basically help to think about strategy. Some of them we knew when we were working on the book. Some of them are kind of new, and we or I have been engaging with them recently. I have also added Sinan's book that you have seen here. So these are all kind of allies of thinking about strategy. And I made a note also at Faizi's presentation that special issue on strategy should be on my reading list very soon. So it's great to keep learning about other kind of people and spaces that are tackling this question. So, and from the growth perspective, it's also when thinking about strategy and figuring out strategies, it is also important to be aware of the different kind of closures, hierarchies or injustices that come during processes of strategizing, and to be able to act upon them and reflect upon them in the process. So in that sense, we understand strategy as necessarily dynamic and adaptable, not some kind of plan that you have to really go and implement without looking back, but something that is more kind of agile, let's say, and something that you think through. So we call it a flexible mental map. So that's one of the ways we refer to it in the book. So, okay, now the third part, which is thinking about strategies analytically. So that very much is based on my chapter in the book, but I also have been trying to take it a bit forward with some of the recent discussions, let's say, that I have been engaging with. So, and here what I will do in the remaining part of the talk, so I will identify this or unpack the strategic, I have called a strategic canvas for degrowth. You can also call a strategic canvas for socio-ecological transformation. So I hope that it does not really matter if you see yourself as a degrowther or not, but that it helps to provoke some kind of thinking about strategy. So basically, I will introduce 3 modes of transformation: interstitial, symbiotic, and ruptural. And yes, I should also say already now that it's in this vocabulary that I'm introducing here. So it is based on the work of Erik Olin Wright. And it is in a way in a critical dialogue with Wright. So I also show where I see things differently to the way he was arguing for transformation. So, okay, so basically 3 modes of transformation, and then also there are the different strategic logics that come with those modes. So resisting and escaping for interstitial transformations, that's Wright's categories, but I also add the category of or the strategic logic of building alternatives. So then that's taming and dismantling for symbiotic transformations, and it is smashing, according to Wright, and I also add halting, to kind of build up, let's say, on his work. And the red are basically my additions and some of the key differences. So, and one key difference is how I see ruptural transformation in connection to Wright. So I will go into that more in a bit. But basically, my idea is that they are not only, they don't have to be this like massive, large-scale takeover of the state, but they can be more short-term or done in particular places, and I think that's a helpful way to kind of embrace ruptural transformation as part of strategy within degrowth and also related, perhaps, discussions. So, okay, interstitial transformations involve building new forms of social empowerment on the margins of capitalist society, usually outside of spaces dominated by those in power. And that's a lot of degrowth kind of initiatives, alternatives, networks that we're thinking about. They would be having this kind of mode of transformation at the core. Maybe also something to mention already, that you shouldn't see this modes of transformation or strategic logics as kind of totally separate. So they are dynamic, they interact, and it's actually usually the case that different initiatives have kind of several modes of transformation or strategic logics as part of their repertoire, and they can also change over time and depending on the context. So, but anyway, interstitial transformations, they push for transformation from the bottom up, and the key principles would be horizontality, open relocalization, repoliticization. So very much kind of core of degrowth thinking. So, and here, usually, when you bring up some kind of examples, maybe one comment could be that, oh, they're so small scale, or they're so niched, so how do they really change the world? So, but I think here, the different kind of logics of scaling are important, so that's also something that has been recurring, I think, throughout the summer school. So we need to think of scaling not as just scaling up, so kind of growing bigger of one organization and conquering the world, as a lot of growth-based thinking has been about, but scaling out, so with where, for example, but similar alternatives pop up in different places, being inspired by each other, and then they are autonomous at the same time, but can be connected in various ways. Or scaling with, when it is about different kind of actors doing different things, joining forces to for example, build an alternative solidarity network together. So, and also many of these alternatives that we would be mentioning, they are also scaling deep in the sense that they change our ideas of what is possible, of how things could be done differently and how we could live differently in society. So they kind of open up our imaginaries of good life beyond growth and beyond and away from capitalism. So I think the maps are kind of often powerful ways of visualizing things, because then something that is smaller scale in one context and may seem as not so significant, you actually see how many initiatives are working in the same direction. So that's the map of renewable energy cooperatives network. And I also saw, I mean, we have mentioned it yesterday, and also I saw that several of you had the posters on the initiatives that are kind of part of this, let's say, network or movement. Not necessarily this particular network, but this, general, let's say, movement for doing renewable energy differently and more cooperatively. So another example that is also connected to my work is precious plastic. So, and that I think in the spirit it's close to this design global manufacture local models that were brought up yesterday, and the wind and power that Zoe Christina was also talking about. So these are about basically they design machines to enable recycling locally. No? So today the problem with recycling, it looks, in some countries it looks good or better on paper, but basically it means that things that people throw away, say somewhere in Northern Europe, then they are shipped to other places around the world. So and in the global south. So in that sense, precious plastic tries to figure out, okay, how can we take care of the waste locally and also more collectively? And then these open source machines that they have been designing and that different people from this community have been contributing to. So then this is something that can be basically applied and manufactured locally in different places. So sharing the knowledge and tools on how to do things. So, okay, then the strategic logics of interstitial transformation, I already said resisting, escaping, and building alternatives, and that's the one that I add, and that's the one that I really want to emphasize. So resisting points to a particular problem and brings the attention to it of different kind of actors in society, such as decision makers, employers, and others. So climate justice demonstration or some kind of protest can be seen as often working within this strategic logic. And we can say that, okay, it kind of provides a diagnosis that things need to be changed. So we would often hear like system change, not climate change at the various climate demonstrations, but it doesn't necessarily come with a broader vision for transformation and what is to be done. So escaping, and here it's important to say that right means escaping not like individualist escaping, but escaping for kind of a more collective ways of living and more also egalitarian ways of living. But basically, according to Wright, this typically involves avoiding political engagement and certainly collectively organized efforts at changing the world. So, and we can say, okay, maybe running an eco-village collectively with other like-minded people, but without this broader political engagement could be an example. So, and of course, it's not easy to run these initiatives in the first place because a lot of the kind of systems around you are doing something different, and it's few maybe spaces where these kinds of initiatives, let's say, are supported and promoted institutionally. But still, if this is like a particular isolated space and some oasis of difference, this will not bring the kind of change that we want to see. So in that sense, building alternatives as a strategic logic emphasizes political engagement, deliberately building collective power outside the capitalist system. So if being part of an eco-village, you are engaged in building a solidarity economy network where you are, then it is already and also trying to bring together and be part of this larger ecosystem somehow of alternatives so that more things can be done outside capitalism, so and outside the mainstream spaces, and that are not dependent on the kind of state or larger scale or kind of problematic organizations. So, and also this can be done, let's say, locally, but also it could be done more, for example, with different international connections in mind. I mean, it's been a long practice, for example, in certain alternative spaces, cafes in Europe, to buy coffee from the Zapatistas. So that would also be an example of kind of building networks with others and supporting those doing things in autonomous territories and kind of building some mutual connection and mutual aid, let's say, networks. So, and here there are strategic questions. So basically I will be trying to identify these key strategic directions to think about when keeping to introduce the canvas. So how to avoid resorting to escaping only, knowing that it is hard to run alternatives, and sometimes we do end up in kind of firefighting. So, but instead, like how to build alternatives, and building alternatives collectively with other groups around us, but also in other spaces, is a key strategic direction for degrowth, and I would say for socio-ecological transformation. So then, moving to symbiotic transformations, so these are aimed at changing the existing institutional forms and deepening popular social empowerment within the current system so as to ultimately transform it. So, and basically, the idea here is to push for transformations through available governance methods and institutional mechanisms and various actors. So it's definitely the state, and we have been bringing up the state and trying to change that at different levels, but also international organizations or various kind of established institutions, including universities, trade unions, and so on. So they can be, these are the ones to be pushed to bring change. And I think in the degrowth discussions, usually it has been emphasized, this like bottom-up push for interstitial transformation, but also acknowledging the need to actually try and change the institutions that surround us, because they are so much kind of limiting the scope of what is possible. So, and in that sense, yes, they are important to engage with in order to expand the spaces for alternatives and in order to limit ecologically and socially harmful activities. So, for example, degrowthers have been kind of formulating, okay, what policies could be different at the EU level to put well-being at the forefront rather than growth. I mean, not only at the EU level, but there's been kind of one space where thinking has been channeled to. So, and then also one effort that is maybe worth noting has been this Beyond Growth conference. It's actually not been one only, but this 2023 was particularly huge. It took place at the European Parliament, and basically for a couple of days it was filled with people thinking very critically, activists, scholars, some kind of people working in those structures that we want to change, but that are very much aligned with thinking that it is not incremental changes that are needed, but more bigger changes. So, and it was also so much attention that it got, so the European Parliament was full of people and life, and it was called like the Woodstock, or it was compared to Woodstock Festival and so on. And it was also Ursula von der Leyen and then Roberta Metsola, who was then the president of the European Parliament. They had to give some speeches at the beginning, so it was such a big event, so they also showed up. But of course, what happened is that they reinforced the message of green growth there during the 10 minutes of their speeches and left the room. So what happened is that it was kind of an important symbolic event, so we can say, yeah, we have made it to the European Parliament, and it was really different for those couple of days, and it's good that those discussions are heard, but the power left the room, mostly, during that, the time of this conference, and it's not that things have changed at the EU level, no, so it's still the European Green Deal that is being pushed, also with a lot of concessions to kind of some problematic actors and their powerful lobbies. So also the kind of whole security and militarization is on the rise. So the problem, basically, of engaging with these terrains of power shaped by them is that it's very difficult to actually make change happen. So someone, I think it was Michael, who mentioned the Green New Deal for Europe as an alternative proposal pushed by DiEM25 at the level of the kind of European Union. But also, okay, it was a proposal, but it really didn't get more kind of support and more discussion, or hasn't been able to push things in a different direction. So, but then also, anyway, we kind of don't give up fully, no, on those efforts. It's just important, and I'm speaking here as someone who very much wants to emphasize the interstitial transformation, but maybe who is a bit cautious at going too much in the direction of trying to speak to policymakers and convince them to do things differently. So I think we need to really push them hard and collectively as a kind of bigger alliance of forces. So, but I would also maybe here like to mention that it's not only the, let's say, European or national policies, institutions that we are trying to push to change. So it is also really important to recognize how these institutions that are very much run from the global north have devastating and suffocating effects in the global south. So in the degrowth discussions, we're very much aware of the unequal exchange, extractivism, and all that kind of this pursuit of growth in the north, what it has caused in the global south, but also some groups in the degrowth discussions are pushing that, okay, we should not be only talking about the awareness of this and then build our interstitial alternatives, but we should really take the responsibility and take action on it. So in that sense, for example, arguing for debt cancellation in the global south, arguing for reparations, and really visibilizing the climate debt of the north to the south is something that is maybe more prominent currently in the degrowth discussions. So one initiative is that for climate that is exactly doing that, no? So kind of pushing for debt cancellation in the global south and connecting it very much to climate. So this is something that as, let's say, degrowthers, we can be involved more and can support more. So, okay, now the strategic logics of symbiotic transformation, these are taming and dismantling, and here I'm not adding anything new in connection to Wright. So policies are kind of easy to think about when we think of symbiotic transformation, but of course it's not only about policies, but we can say, okay, taming is some sort of policy that establishes absolute caps on CO2 emissions. So it does something, it's important, we have been arguing for like this absolute reduction, no, of biophysical throughput, but it will not change the structures within society. So these powerful actors, they will be tamed a bit, but they will not really have to reorganize themselves, or they will not be dismantled this way. So in that sense, the strategic logic of dismantling, so something working within that logic could be a policy that turns companies into worker-run cooperatives in the long run. So these are the kinds of proposals when COVID came, right, and many companies needed really a lot of public support to stay afloat because they couldn't keep their economic activities. Some people, like Naomi Klein, as far as I remember, was saying, okay, they should really come with some also changes to the very structures of these companies, of these organizations. So it should not be this kind of unconditional bailout just because they're contributing to the economy. So then kind of these are the kinds of proposals that we would be, let's say, after when speaking of dismantling. And one can argue that, okay, both are needed for socio-ecological transformation and can be mutually reinforcing, but there is a kind of tension here. So when it comes to taming, there is a risk of co-optation. So the big question here that, okay, how to make it so that our efforts for transformation don't result in only taming, no? So, and how do we go towards dismantling the institutions that are problematic and that are surrounding us? So in that sense, dismantling is a key kind of strategic direction for degrowth and socio-ecological transformation. Okay, now we move to the ruptural transformations. So they seek a sharp break with existing institutions and social structures and involve direct confrontation with the state and or dominant economic actors. So, and as I mentioned already, it's got very limited attention in Wright as a kind of pathway to transformation. So, and I would say that in many degrowth discussions, until maybe our book, it's also something that has been reproduced. So it's been very much that, okay, let's try to have a combination of interstitial and symbiotic transformation to move things forward. But my argument is that ruptural transformations should be part of how we kind of move forwards and how we push for transformation. So, and that local and or temporal ruptures are important, enabling change by taking power from capital or from the state. So in that sense, they can disrupt the rhythm of harmful capitalist activities, and they can also encourage others, pushing authorities to act or comply with grassroots demands. So one example here that we have been engaging with my colleagues based in Copenhagen, so was the encampment in support of Palestine and solidarity with Palestine in Copenhagen. So, and it was quite interesting there, so students against the occupation, it was called. It was quite interesting that the movement in solidarity with Palestine, so it existed for a longer time. And they were mobilizing different kinds of efforts, especially different, I don't know, petitions, letters to the university saying that, okay, we should do this and this and this, we should divest from Israeli institutions that are basically complicit in crimes and later genocide against the Palestinian people. So, but they were not listened to. So there were many calls, but they could be ignored by the university authorities. But then basically when the encampment was formed, which kind of introduced a rupture, let's say, in the everyday university activities, and of course it was part of the broader, let's say, movement around the world that really tried to be so vocal and to resist what has been happening in Palestine. So this kind of ruptural space created something that made the university speak to this group and to think what could be done. So they had to react, in other words, and they could not really be ignored. And what happened? So they had quite a list of demands, but the demand to divest from Israeli institutions was satisfied, so already 1 year ago. And also this is something that inspired other efforts around. So then similar effort happened at the city level, and I think that the city of Copenhagen also divested, if I remember correctly. But of course, it is also important to know that, okay, it's only partially that the demands are satisfied, and the ruptural kind of interventions can push for change. So in that sense, also there is much more to be done. And now also this particular group, they are campaigning for academic boycott of Israeli institutions. So in that sense, struggle continues despite this relative success. So, but also it is important, so in that sense, ruptural kind of working within the ruptural mode of transformation can accelerate change. So, and can encourage others, but also it does come with risks of criminalization, or comes with risks of this like unfulfilled promises by authorities. So, occupied ex-GKN factory that was mentioned several times also is another example that works with this kind of repertoire of ruptural transformation. So, and I think that I don't need to introduce what it was about, so I will move on to the strategic logics, but I will, I think, mention it again. So basically, strategic logics of ruptural transformations are halting and smashing. So halting aims at stopping disruptive activities, even if for a short time. So civil disobedience actions, such as occupying coal mine, and the Galende actions have been working with this quite a lot. So it stops these rhythms of disruptive, harmful, destructive practices. So, and smashing is getting hold of a space and its infrastructure and their reclamation from capital. So in that sense, this is something that connects to what, say, workers in the ex-GKN factory did. So a factory occupation, land occupation, they work within that strategic logic. So, and here, there are kind of also risks and strategic possibilities. So risk is that, of course, this whatever works against, let's say, the current laws can be repressed, and often very heavily. No, I think today it is the announcement will be made if Palestine Action in the UK will be proscribed as the terrorist organization or not. So it's really serious kind of risks that these initiatives face. And also JKN factory, as far as I know, they also have a serious risk of eviction currently. So there is this kind of constant pressure of different kinds that comes from authorities. But also what then is a key strategic direction here is that, okay, how to build alliances with other groups and how to build public support to basically be able to push for transformation and also to be able to resist those risks of repression and maybe even to come stronger from those. So another example is the Soulèvement de la Terre in France that were also, there was an attempt to criminalize them and to label them as eco-terrorist organization in France, but due to a lot of support and large alliances, this did not happen ultimately. So with the GKN, I think it's very interesting, so with the occupied factory, how they have actually been trying to work in both directions. So building this popular support by, for example, issuing these kind of popular shares, which made everyone in different places of the world, or not everyone, but maybe people connected to the more kind of leftist, radical leftist circles know that there is this factory that can be supported and encouraging people to actually be part of supporting them. But also it is so exciting how they have built the aligns with the climate movements in Italy. So something that Lorenzo talked about. So how they really joined forces and thought through, okay, how can we move forward in the future of this factory? What can we produce, and what we will produce it for, and what implications it will have for the climate. So, and now basically I'm moving to the conclusion. So we have, from what I have mapped out, this strategic canvas for degrowth and socio-ecological transformation. So we have implications, let's say, for degrowth as a vision of transformation, and we also have implications for thinking about strategies analytically. So when it comes to degrowth, it is a plurality of strategies that is needed, but also maybe in view of the key strategic directions that I have identified. So it is not about like anything goes, but no, it is about thinking about strategy analytically, but also knowing that different strategies can be complementary, and we need to look for this kind of potentialities for synergies. So, but also, of course, it depends on the circumstances of different groups. So some groups can be much more focused in their strategies. So it could be that the kind of positioning of a particular group means that, I don't know, some coal mine is being expanded in the region where they are. So it is then maybe this more disruptive action that is something to go for to try and stop the harmful expansion. But I don't know, some other groups that might be working more on kind of close to institutions like the European Union. So, of course, it is also more logical that they would be working more connected to the symbiotic mode of transformation. So, and when it comes to thinking about strategies analytically, and here I really hope that this kind of canvas helps you to think about strategies, whether you are a degrowther or not. So basically, these analytical categories that I have identified, they usually come in combinations, so that's something to keep in mind. So it's not about boxing initiatives, but it's kind of figuring out where they are positioned and how things can be done differently to kind of empower, to go towards collective empowerment, let's say. So, and then the canvas allows to map out the current strategic configurations and evaluate the possible tensions and potentialities, and ultimately to deliberate on how to build transformative strategies in the future. So yes, and I think that is it. So I will finish here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ekaterina.